This week, we bring you very important information on what you can do to support clean energy. Norfolk and Alexandria get caught encouraging struggling students to opt out of standardized testing, and we bring you the rest of the week's news on the ForVirginia podcast. Let's get started. Thanks and welcome to the ForVirginia podcast for the week ending September 17th, 2016, show number 7. I'm your host, Michael Brandon Wade. Thank you for tuning in. ForVirginia is a Virginia state political action committee focused on supporting progressive causes and candidates at the local and state level. Our weekly podcast is meant to provide you with news and analysis of politics across the state, helping you get the information you need to be an informed citizen, battle right-wing propaganda, and to help progressives organize and activate where we are most needed. As always, we'd like to ask that you go to our website at forvirginia.org, where we'll be posting show notes with links to all the sources that we referenced during today's show. And if you like what we're doing and would like to support us, please head on over to our ActBLUE page and make a donation. Thanks again for all your support. I just want to start off this week's show by giving a shout out to the guys over at Progressive House VA. They had an article in Waynesboro's The News Virginian. New grassroots PAC seeks to shake up Virginia House races. A lot of good quotes from Josh Stansfield. The goal is to make sure there's opposition in every single House of Delegates seat next year. Reading this article, it talks about Steve Landis, who's a Republican House of Delegates member in the area there, talking about the term progressive, noting that plenty of today's conservatives are progressive. Well, Mr. Landis, I would like to know exactly what you mean by that. He also says Sanders is not a progressive, that Sanders' philosophy is liberal socialism. The two scariest words you can say to a conservative. So we've got a great interview this week. We spoke with Ivy Maine, who is the writer, editor, what you will, of PowerToThePeopleVA.com, which is an excellent website that focuses strictly on Virginia power policy. Spoke to her at length earlier this week, and I've got that interview coming up right away. But first, we got to get to last week's news. So some good news. I'd like to update from last week's stories. We talked about the lockout that happened right after Labor Day with some Dominion subsidiaries regarding some contract negotiations. More than 900 workers at Dominion Hope and Dominion Transmission will be back to work this weekend, according to Wheeling News Register. The lockout began September 7th, impacted workers in West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, and Virginia. And good to see that they were able to get that squared away and back to work. Negotiations are still in effect. The union agreed not to strike in return for Dominion agreeing not to lock them out. We also want to point out, for those of you that aren't aware, that there will be a right to work for less amendment up for vote on this November's ballot. It's called Amendment 1, and we are encouraging everyone to vote against it. See our Right to Work for Less, our Stop Right to Work for Less Facebook page for more articles and information about that. Link will be in the show notes. Many of you are no doubt aware of the ongoing saga of Bob McDonald, former governor, who had his corruption conviction overturned by the Supreme Court. Prosecutors dropped charges against him last week instead of trying to retry him. The Richmond Times-Dispatch reports that McDonald owes $10 million in legal fees for his conviction case. I guess it's worth it to not spend a year in jail. But also related, the businessman at the center of the corruption case, Johnny Williams Sr., former CEO of Star Scientific, who was the one that showered the McDonald's with over $177,000 in gifts, sold his Goochland County home for $2 million less than he bought it for. A $2.7 million sale after placing the house on the market for almost $5 million last March. Finally sold the 9,000 square foot. Talk about a bad return on investment, huh? Both on the house and on McDonald. And also in statewide news, the Supreme Court of Virginia has declined to charge Governor McAuliffe with contempt of court following the governor's ongoing efforts to restore the voting rights of felons who have served their debt to Virginia. Supreme Court of Virginia originally declared that McDonald's blanket restoration of over 200,000 voting records was unconstitutional, but have decided not to press McAuliffe's recent efforts to restore them in smaller chunks, basically. I think the last batch was about 13 or 15,000 names. There's been more since then. The Republicans have been throwing a fit over this, trying to put forward new legislation to ban violent felons from having their rights restored, automatic restorations of others, and revoking the governor's right to do restorations at all. They've been howling for the Supreme Court to find McAuliffe in contempt of court, and the Supreme Court has declined to do so. So hopefully that will be the end of that. And this is probably the update that brings me the most pleasure to tell you about. The Hampton Roads Regional Jail, where recent inmate deaths have been occurring. Michael Mitchell, Henry Stewart, Mark Goodrum, 3 that we know of. Mitchell, who was arrested for stealing $5 worth of junk food out of a 7-Eleven, died in a cell 40 days later, malnourished and 40 pounds lighter. Henry Stewart, who wrote several emergency requests for medical treatment, dead. Mark Goodrum, another inmate who was arrested for smoking pot, could not pay $100 bail and dead a month later. There's several others as well that we don't have information on due to medical privacy laws. We covered this past couple weeks in a row. We'll keep talking about it until something changes. This week, the Virginian pilot announcing that Norfolk Sheriff Bob McCabe will be the jail's interim superintendent after former Superintendent David Simons announced he would retire later this year, but was then forced out after the committee voted to accept his resignation immediately. He'll be on until the end of the month as McCabe transitions into the position. State Attorney Mark Herring, of course, called for a federal investigation into the jail last week following Mr. Stewart's. So, one guy out. We'll see if anybody else takes responsibility for what's happened over there. I continue to encourage you to hold the jail's board members responsible, including Portsmouth Councilman Curtis Edmonds, Newport News Sheriff Gabe Morgan, and now Norfolk Sheriff Bob McCabe. Also worth noting is another article from the pilot from Friday that Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency pulled all of their detainees out of the Hampton Roads Regional Jail in 2014 after the jail failed to meet standards and Michael Mitchell died. And speaking of Portsmouth, the city has agreed to pay $1 million to the family of an unarmed 18-year-old black man who was shot and killed by police. Family of William Chapman Jr. have reportedly settled with the city in principle in order to avoid a civil suit with the city with regards to Chapman's April 22, 2015 death at the hands of police officer Stephen Rankin, who was fired from the police department after being indicted. A jury convicted Rankin of 1 count of voluntary manslaughter for fatally shooting Chapman in a Walmart parking lot. Currently appealing the decision, Rankin faces 2.5 years. And same officer who previously shot and killed another man in 2011, in which he was both cleared by the grand jury in the criminal case and won a civil case. And wrapping up the news, reports of FBI investigating voter fraud in Harrisonburg following an organization that was submitting registration applications in the names of deceased individual. The FBI and Harrisonburg Police Department, according to the Daily News Record, are not commenting on the identity of the organization, but the article also mentions a DC-based nonprofit called the Voter Participation Center, which has been sending out letters to residents of 18 states, including Virginia, urging people to register. The problem, says Director of Elections Deborah Logan, is that these letters are going to elderly people who are already registered and are easily confused and don't know how to verify their registration. Well, I'm very interested to know who the FBI is investigating. I know who usually gets blamed for registering dead people. Whether it's a mistake or not, or whether it's systematic, we will continue to update you on this story as more information becomes available. And with that, it's time for this week's Shame of the Week. The Virginia Pilot is reporting that the city of Norfolk schools have been pulling struggling students out of classes before they can take the standardized tests known as the SOLs, or Standard of Learning Tests. The practice, called recycling, pulls struggling students out of classes following poor performance in a first semester course, putting them in different classes or repeating the first semester so that the student does not have to participate in the standardized testing. The Virginian Pilot, through a Freedom of Information request, retrieved emails between the school officials that stated, one of which stated, quote, "I do not know if the practice is allowable, but I personally feel that the practice is unethical and not done in the best interest of the child. Rather, it is done to limit exposure to testing in the spring and does not address instructional issues that need to be fixed. In core subjects, first semester enrollment in SOL courses dropped by as much as 57% by the beginning of the second semester. In 2015, according to the data the pilot looked at, math being the most prevalent, Ted Daughtry, Granby principal who retired in June, defended the practice, saying that recycling students in math makes sense because it's difficult for them to learn the second part of a course if they haven't mastered the first. True point, but it definitely looks like it has the appearance of rather manipulating test scores, because we all know how those test scores play into school rankings, accreditations, teacher performance pay, and bonuses. And according to a Washington Post article, Virginia education officials revealed also that an Alexandria school tried to do the same thing by using the state's new law allowing parents to opt their children out of standardized tests. Mayor Kenny Alexander plans to question school officials, quote, "To have kids removed from the class and not have those kids tested in order to game the system is certainly unacceptable," end quote. A subsequent Washington Post article states that teachers at Cora Kelly School for Math, Science, and Technology, a high-poverty school in Alexandria, were told by Principal Brandon Davis to call the parents of students who appeared on the brink of failing the exams to inform them of their right to opt out of the tests. 36 parents decided to pull their children from the SOL exams. No parents at the school had done so the previous year. Principal Brandon Davis of a math, science, and technology school, gaming the system so that students' scores would not be considered for state accreditation purposes, artificially inflating the school's performance and masking the fact that some students were not up to standards. There you have it, your Shame of the Week. And we do have something new that we want to do this week. We're calling it Fame of the Week. Our first Fame of the Week goes to Loudoun County School Board member Joey Maloney. Miss Maloney survived a censure attempt following her arrest at a Donald Trump rally at Briarwoods High School. To quote Miss Maloney, "I fully believe in and passionately defend the First Amendment to the Constitution. I was never rude and never expressed anger towards any attendees or deputies, even when neighbors were shouting profanities at me in front of their children." End quote. According to spokesman for the sheriff's offices, deputies assigned to the high school for the August 2nd rally were told Maloney stepped in front of several attendees waiting to go inside. She was asked to go back in line and refused to do so before sitting on the ground. Maloney was charged with trespassing and taken into custody after she continued to remain seated and refused to leave. She was taken to a Loudoun magistrate and released on a $1,000 bond. Was seen moments before giving an interview with Voice of America wearing a Love Trump's Hate sticker on her t-shirt, claiming that she stepped out of line for the interview and tried to step back in line, which is when all the commotion occurred. Board members Jill Turgeon and Eric DeKennep wrote a resolution for the board to formally condemn Maloney for her actions at the rally. Community members spoke asking not to censure her, and she is scheduled to appear on trespassing charge. I guess that was earlier this week. I don't have any additional information on that. I'll find it for you and have it for you next week. We would like to applaud Ms. Maloney for standing up, or in this case, sitting down for her First Amendment rights against Trump.
We have Ivy Maine on the phone. She is an expert on Virginia energy policy. Ivy, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on this week.
Thank you for having me.
So this blog, the
Power for the People VA.
Power for the People VA. I mean, it is the most comprehensive source of like what's going on with regards to the power utilities and the state legislator that I've seen. How long have you been doing this?
So either 3 or 4 years. I've kind of lost track. But I started it because at the time nobody was writing about Virginia energy policy, and that made it really hard for renewable energy advocates to get our voices out there.
Right. So is your background in policy or?
Well, so I'm a lawyer by training. And I've also a writer. I spent several years writing a humor column of all things.
So you started writing this policy website on what I wanted to talk about, the Clean Power Plan. You wrote a lot of stuff about the renewables update this week. Do you want to just give like a quick summary of like some of the more important parts of what's been going on with regards to your latest update?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the really exciting things that is happening in Virginia right now is that solar energy has finally taken off.
Right.
So whereas we have been always lagging our neighboring states hugely. I mean, North Carolina has 100 times the amount of solar that we have, and of course we have no wind at all. And what we are seeing with solar energy, and this is nationwide, but it's also true here in Virginia, is that it has reached the price point where it makes economic sense to do it at every level. And Virginia is suddenly an attractive place for corporations to come and buy solar power, for the utilities to do it, for almost anybody who can do a large-scale project. And so we're seeing that opening up, and it's very exciting.
Right. I know Isle of Wight County and I believe Chesapeake also has something that they're building out as well.
There's a whole number of projects. My guess is whereas up until the end of 2015, we had a cumulative total of 22 megawatts of solar statewide. By the end of this year, it will be over 200. We're just suddenly taking off here, which
Excellent.
is fantastic. But that is mostly at the utility scale level. These are mostly the really large projects, and we're not seeing as much on rooftop solar and on residential solar, and a lot of that is because of the state policies driven by the utilities that are holding that back. And so there are a number of things that are a problem for us. The utilities won't just sell you solar or wind. If you call up your utility and say, I don't want to buy fossil fuels, I want to buy renewable energy, you can't do it.
And you'd mentioned that there were several bills that might have changed that were in consideration in the GA last session and all got shot down. And are you aware of anything that is been submitted for this session that people might want to be aware of?
Well, what happened last year, it was kind of a delaying tactic, but what the House and Senate Commerce and Labor Committees did, and those are the two committees that consider the renewable energy bills. And the chairmen of those two committees decided they wouldn't hear any of the bills.
And do you know who those people are, the name of those chairmen?
Yes, Frank Wagner, who is a Virginia Beach senator, and Terry Kilgore, who's from Southwest Virginia. He's the House chairman. They're both Republicans. Both take a lot of money from utilities, and this to us looks like a delaying tactic, a way of keeping these bills from being heard for a year, because there is a lot of public support for bills for legislation that would open up the solar market, particularly for distributed generation, which is the rooftop solar.
And a lot of that, and for some of our less, some people that might not be aware, that you're talking about basically the net metering policies, I believe. Is that correct?
Well, it's both. There's problems with net metering policies, but also these PPAs that if you're a university and you would like to put solar on your roof, right now there's only a limited program in Dominion territory, and there is no program in Appalachian Power territory to do that. And these are things that the utilities should not be putting up barriers to, right? We should be encouraging if private investment. If anybody wants to put their own money into building solar panels on their roofs, they should be doing it. And this is utilities protecting their monopolies with a desire to control the electric sector in Virginia. But it's obviously not good for the public. It's not good for people who want to control their own energy use, and it's bad for climate change.
No doubt about it. So you've lived in Virginia for a number of years, I'm sure. Can you tell some of our younger listeners and people who may have not lived in the state when this happened, but the utility company used to actually be owned by the state, back in the late 80s, early 90s, is that correct?
No, these are, what we've had, these are, Dominion Power used to be called Virginia Electric Power Company, but it's the same company. What we went through, in the old days, it was a vertically integrated. So that's what we have today. Is that the Dominion Power, which used to be VEPCO, owns the wires and the power generation. They went through a period in which the legislature deregulated in order to encourage competition, but then they decided they didn't like that. Our take on it is that Dominion decided they were making more money if they were regulated, meaning that they could that they could be monopolies again. And so they wrote up a re-regulation bill. So it's still it is a public utility, but it is an investor-owned utility. So this is, by calling it a public utility, that doesn't mean that it's not essentially a private company. It just means that it is regulated by the state. But that's always been true.
Yeah, I was a little bit younger when that name change happened. I have several family members who are Dominion employees, one of which, and a lot of people might not know this, so I want to talk a little bit more about the CPP and especially the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the RGGI. My understanding of it, from my layperson standpoint, is that the CPP has a certain threshold requirement of greenhouse gas reductions, and it's pretty much a mandatory program from the Obama administration, whereas the RGGI is a voluntary program which has higher thresholds. I believe it's something like 25 for the CPP and maybe like 30 or 40 for the RGGI. My understanding, and I'll tell you what I believe, and you just can correct me if however I'm wrong. I no doubt will be, but my understanding is that the states that have participated in the RGGI are seeing these explosions in solar output, solar jobs. There was a lot of confusion coming out of last year's General Assembly because there were several bills being put forward. Ron Villanueva and Mr. Yancey. Villanueva is out of Chesapeake and Yancey's out of Newport News. I couldn't make heads or tails out of what was going on there because it seemed like on one hand Yancey was putting forth legislation for the RGGI, and then on the other hand he was voting against other legislation. So can you clear some of that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a program by the northeastern states down to and including Maryland, not all of them, but most of the New England states and some of the Mid-Atlantic states. Virginia is not a member, nor is North Carolina, but it has. They set their own carbon cap, and they have been tightening it year by year. And so those states, the RGGI states, they're called, have done more to fight climate change than non-RGGI states.
Right.
The Clean Power Plan really doesn't affect the RGGI states because they have done so much already. There are some states in there that will have to that do still have coal plants that will be affected, but they're all in pretty good shape. And actually, Virginia has a pretty modest requirement under the Clean Power Plan too. We really, if we did nothing but use energy a little more efficiently and meet any new demand with renewable energy, we could meet the Clean Power Plan goals. So it isn't going to be
impossible.
A difficult thing for us.
Mm-hmm.
Now the beauty of, if we were to join RGGI, the great thing about that is that it creates a kind of a carbon trading program, and the utilities buy allowances under the kind of cap and trade program, and that money then can go to pay for things like adapting to sea level rise in Hampton Roads, or supporting energy efficiency for low-income consumers, or putting solar panels on schools. So it raises money, and that has been a great driver in the RGGI states of greater energy efficiency, which then has all these great benefits of saving money for consumers and so on. Mm-hmm. So yes, Ron Villanueva in the House, Don McEachin in the Senate. So it was a Republican and a Democrat were the ones really pushing for Virginia to join RGGI as one tool for meeting the Clean Power Plan and for raising money to meet these needs for renewable energy and energy efficiency and adaptation to climate change. With the exception of a very few Republicans, it didn't get anywhere.
It hasn't gone anywhere. I think 2015 is not the first time it came through. All right. Well, Ivy, I think we got a few minutes left. So you had posted something in this week's update about a series of town hall meetings that were occurring across the state with regards to solar, community solar.
Yeah. So community solar is this idea that for those of us who have shady roofs, or who are renters, or have older roofs and can't put solar on our own roofs, we could buy into a project that would be somewhere else and get credit on our bills for the energy generated by our share of this project. That's community solar.
And so who's the organization that is doing this meeting, that are doing these town halls?
So there are a lot of people who've been working on community solar. This is a project of a group put together by the utilities and the solar industry, trying to find a way to do community solar that the utilities won't oppose. Always in the past, the bills have been killed because the utilities don't want it. They are willing to talk about it, and so that this stakeholder group of theirs has put together the beginnings of an initiative, a pilot program, and so they are kind of taking public comment on what they've drafted, and they'd like to hear from people on it. It's on that website. It's a little difficult to follow because essentially they're taking comments on so many different aspects that it's really hard to gauge what it is that might be a final product out of this. So where people can really weigh in is in saying, yes, I would do this, I would pay more or I wouldn't pay more. That's the kind of information that they need from the general public.
So just to reiterate, people should show up and basically say that they would buy into this, or that they would pay a small premium to have community solar?
I would hope that people would show up and say that we would like a program that delivers us solar power at the same price that we're paying for dirty fuels, because we know that today you can build solar facilities that can compete with dirty fuels. So there's no reason that we should have to pay a premium. You should be able to get this for the same retail price that you're paying. And
so we should people should demand it, right? We should show up and we should demand it.
Yeah, and let them know that there is a great deal of interest in this. We do want this ability. It's crazy that the utilities at the moment won't sell us wind and solar, and that's crazy.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier about my family ties to Dominion. So one of my relatives actually has 36 acres. I won't name the county, but they have 36 acres of land, and they were approached by someone to clear cut the entire 36 acres so that they could grind the wood pulp up and sell it to Dominion to use in one of their wood burning plants, because under the terms of the of the CPP rather, wood pulp is a renewable resource. So they could clear cut this 36 acre forest, plant some more trees down after they grind up and burn the wood pulp, and Dominion would be able to use it in an accounting of reducing carbon emissions. And I think that is criminal, basically.
I totally agree with you. Now, this is not, the Clean Power Plan doesn't really address biomass specifically, but it's Virginia's renewable portfolio standard. The definition of renewable energy includes biomass, including from trees, and whether it's sustainably harvested or not. And we have tried to get that changed, but we've been blocked by the forestry and lumbering industry in Virginia. They want their public subsidy.
So is that something that the General Assembly is dealing with, or is that more of an executive decision based off of some cabinet or whatever?
It would be the General Assembly, but this is Virginia. The industry, if you can't get industry to voluntarily work with you on changing legislation like that, they won't do it. We've tried, and they just dug in their heels, and we're not willing to consider any changes to this currently allowing trees to be called renewable energy, whether sustainably harvested or not.
So before we end the interview, you have the final say.
One thing that everybody should do between now and the end of the year is to look up who your delegate and state senator are, if you don't already know, and make an appointment. And they're always willing to talk to their constituents, and go in and talk to them about renewable energy and climate change and what you want to see. They need to hear this from their constituents. And you as constituents are the most powerful force. You're more important than the money.
There you have it. Ivy Maine, powerforthepeopleva.com. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
I tried real hard to keep the show under 30 minutes today. I couldn't do it. I was on the phone with Ivy for 40 minutes. You tried editing it down. Please. I'm doing this. I produce this all by myself. If you want to help with either interviews or content or helping me produce the show, by all means, I would love the help. That's all the time we've got for this week. We appreciate everyone that tuned in. Thank you for Ivy for the interview. Thank you for all your support and all your shares. Please check out the website, ForVirginia.org. Share us on social media, Facebook, ForVirginia. And your financial support is always appreciated. We have an ActBLUE account. Chip in a couple dollars if you like what we're doing. Help us keep the revolution moving in Virginia. This is the For Virginia podcast, episode 7. Submit your feedback. Let us know how we're doing, how you like it, what you do, what you don't. We'll continue working hard to bring you the news, information, and analysis to help keep the progressive revolution moving forward in Virginia through 2017 and beyond. My name is Michael Brandon Wade. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.